You do everything right, and the garden still punishes you. You buy the fertilizer, you drag the hose out in the heat. You follow the instructions on the label, down to the teaspoon, and then a week later, you're standing over a bed of yellowing leaves. A tomato plant that stalled at knee height, and soil so hard your fingers bounce off the surface instead of sinking in. That frustration has become strangely normal, not just in gardens but everywhere. Grocery prices climb, weather swings harder, shelves go thin when supply chains hiccup, and suddenly even a few herbs, greens, or homegrown vegetables start to feel less like a hobby and more like a quiet form of security. But then you step outside to grow your own food and run into the same wall: weak plants, crusted soil, constant inputs, disappointing harvests. The problem is usually not that you failed your soil. It is that you inherited a growing system already running on depletion, a system that taught you to think of soil as an empty container, and plants as machines: add water, add fertilizer, expect output. So when the plants struggle, the answer always seems to be another bag, another bottle, another treatment, another purchase, more nitrogen, more bloom booster. You can feel it when you press your hand down. Healthy soil gives a little. It smells deep and earthy, almost sweet. It breaks apart in crumbs. Deadened soil resists you. It seals over after rain, cracks under sun, and turns to powder when dry. And once that happens, you start entering a cycle that is exhausting by design. The soil loses structure, so it can't hold moisture well. Because it can't hold moisture, plants stress faster. Because the plants stress faster, they become more vulnerable. Because they look weak, you reach for more inputs. The inputs may give a temporary burst, but they do not rebuild the living engine beneath the crop. That is why so many backyards now feel like they are working against the person caring for them. You can be attentive, disciplined, and sincere, and still lose. You can water faithfully and watch the top inch turn slick, while the lower layer stays tight and airless. And this matters far beyond gardening pride. In unstable times, dead soil is not a minor inconvenience. It is a weak point. That is the real pain most growers are feeling, even if they don't have words for it yet. They think they need better fertilizer. Often, what they actually need is a different understanding of what has gone missing. Because struggling soil is not always hungry in the way we've been taught. Very often, it is biologically exhausted. When that hidden workforce disappears, everything above ground starts to look harder than it should. The bed crusts, the mulch just sits there. Rain doesn't soak in the way it used to. Compost seems slow, and the most damaging part is this: people blame themselves for symptoms of a broken model. They call themselves bad gardeners, when the truth is that many were handed compacted soil, overworked, chemically dependent soil, and then told to solve it with products. No wonder so many quit. Because once you see the problem clearly, the whole story changes. Then it is no longer about feeding plants harder. It is about understanding what the modern growing system taught us to ignore in the first place. Here is the part nobody tells you when your garden keeps failing. The products sold as help are often the very things stripping the life out of the ground. You see yellow leaves, weak stems, compacted beds, and no worms. So you reach for fertilizer, then maybe a stronger fertilizer, then a boost, then a bag of premium potting mix or so, called enriched soil. But if the earth under your feet has gone quiet, those inputs do not fix the problem. Think about the pattern. You feed the plant, not the soil. The leaves green up fast, which feels like proof. But underneath, the biology gets weaker. Salt-heavy fertilizers bypass the long conversation that should be happening. Salt-heavy fertilizers bypass the long conversation that should be happening between roots, fungi, bacteria, and organic matter. Instead of building a living system, they create a drip line of dependence. The plant gets a quick meal, the microbes get sidelined, and the soil never learns how to hold fertility on its own. Then there is tilling, one of the most normalized forms of damage. In modern growing, it looks productive, it looks clean. Freshly turned, soil has that neat, crumbly appearance people are taught to admire. But that moment of order comes at a cost you cannot see. Every pass of the shovel or tiller tears apart fungal threads. Threads that took time to build, collapses worm channels. Channels that carried air and water downward, and exposes protected microbial life to heat, light, and drying. And then come the weed killers, sold as convenience. Spray the unwanted plants, save your effort, keep things tidy. But soil does not experience these chemicals as a tidy solution. It experiences them as a disruption. The roots of weeds are often part of the exchange system that protects bare ground, feeds microbes with exudates, and keeps minerals cycling near the surface. When herbicides move through that space, They do not just remove a nuisance. Even the language is a trick. Plant food feeds instantly, maximum bloom, fortified soil, sterile, and weed-free. Listen closely, and you can hear the worldview inside those labels. It treats soil like a passive container, and plants like machines waiting for fuel. But real soil is not a bucket of brown material holding roots upright. It is a living economy. It is a living economy. It needs structure, carbon, moisture balance, fungal pathways, and countless exchanges, too small to see. The bag on the shelf cannot replace that. That is why so many people say, I did everything right. They did everything the packaging told them to do. They measured the granules, they watered on schedule, they cleared the weeds, they turned the bed, they bought the expensive mix. And still, the soil got harder, thirstier, and more dependent. The roots sat in ground that looked dark but acted dead. Water pooled on top, or vanished too fast, seedlings stalled. If you have ever dug down and found no worms, almost no smell of earth, no soft aggregation, no web of white fungal strands, that is not a sign that your garden needs a pricier input. It is evidence that the biological workforce has been pushed out. Worms do not gather in places where chemistry is doing all the work. They return where decomposition is active, where moisture is moderated, where microbes are fed, and where the soil feels safe enough to breathe again. In other words, the absence of worms is not the disease. And this is where the deception really becomes clear. The more lifeless your soil becomes, the more products the system can sell you. Hard soil, by amendment, by feed. Pests, by spray. No moisture retention, by conditioner. No soil life, by a microbial inoculant in a bottle. Every new symptom becomes another checkout line. Once you see that, the question changes. Not what can I pour on my plants next, but what would make the soil organisms come back on their own. And that is where things start to get interesting. The first creatures you want to answer that invitation are already waiting beneath you, if you know how to call them. Have you ever wondered what actually tells a worm that a patch of earth is worth moving toward? Here is the part most people have never been shown. Worms are not random visitors. They are responders. They move toward a place when the underground starts broadcasting the right message. Not a mystical message, not some vague energy, but chemistry, moisture, temperature, carbon, microbial scent. A living soil speaks in signals. A dead soil goes quiet. And when that ground has been baked, sprayed, stripped, and left bare long enough, the silence underground becomes almost complete. Think about what happens in a forest after light rain. Leaves soften, fungi wake up, bacteria begin feeding. Tiny fragments of carbon dissolve into the thin film of water. Around each soil particle, roots leak sugars. The air, just above the ground, cools. Suddenly, the whole surface layer becomes readable to life below. This is where people miss the real mechanism. They imagine the worm coming for the liquid itself. But the liquid is only the opening move. What matters is what happens after it sinks below the surface. The sugars disperse into the top layer of soil. Microbes begin metabolizing. Fermentation byproducts spread outward through pores and channels. Moisture follows gravity into the spaces around roots, old root tunnels, bits of decaying matter, and tiny aggregates of soil stuck together by biological glues. If you could shrink yourself down and look sideways through the ground, you would not see a solid block of dirt. You would see architecture, crumbs, tunnels, films of water, mineral fragments, fungal threads, air pockets. Life moves through that architecture, like traffic through a city. When the signal enters it, it doesn't sit still, it travels, and that matters because worms are part of a bigger workforce than most gardeners realize. They aren't just little tillers wriggling around in mud. They are grazers in the soil food web. They feed on microbes, softened organic matter, fungal rich residues, and the moist decomposing layer that forms where life is already active. They are drawn less by fertility in the bagged sense, and more by habitat and food in the ecological sense. Give them sterile ground with synthetic salts and hard sun, and there is nothing there for them to live on. Give them damp, microbially active soil with cover above and carbon below, and they begin doing what no bottled product can do for long. They drag organic particles down. They leave casts rich in plant-available nutrients. They open channels that let water sink instead of run off. They improve aggregation so roots can breathe. In other words, they don't merely visit healthy soil, they help manufacture it. That is why timing changes the outcome. Pour this brew onto hot soil at noon, and the message collapses before it spreads. Surface heat rises. Moisture flashes off. Ultraviolet light stresses the very microbes you were trying to wake up, and the top few inches become hostile Again almost immediately. Wait until evening or dawn, and the same liquid behaves differently. Cooler soil holds water longer. Microbial activity has a chance to establish itself. The scent profile develops instead of burning off. The soil stays calm enough for worms to approach the upper layers without drying out. You aren't just applying a mixture, you're matching a biological event to the window when the underground can actually receive it. And if you've ever wondered, what if there are no worms at all? The answer is usually more hopeful than people think. In most places, they aren't gone from the whole landscape. They're absent from that bed, that patch, that damaged zone. They retreat deeper, migrate sideways, or remain sparse, because the surface keeps telling them not to come closer. A worm doesn't need a written invitation. It needs evidence, moisture, food, safety. Once the upper soil starts carrying those signs again, pathways reopen. Old burrows are reused. Nearby populations spread. Even a small increase in activity means the ground is becoming legible to life again. That first faint movement after dark is not just a worm. It is proof that the code still works. So when you check the bed at night and see a slight ripple, or a cast where there was bare dust the day before, you're looking at something modern, growing culture trained people to ignore. Not magic, not a hack, a biological handshake. The surface sent a message, and the underground answered. The real question, then, is simple. If your soil finally gets life to show up, what are you giving it to stay for? The surprising part is that the breakthrough is often not another input. It is restraint. You don't heal dead ground by constantly stirring it, correcting it, and forcing it. Very often, you heal it by covering it, cooling it, and then getting out of the way. A plain sheet of cardboard over a weedy patch. A layer of fallen leaves that most people would bag and throw out. Kitchen scraps tucked under mulch instead of sent to the trash. A rough mound of sticks and prunings buried under soil, so it can act like a sponge for years. These aren't glamorous moves. They don't look like high-performance agriculture. But this is exactly why they work. They create shelter first, and life responds. Think about what the soil surface goes through in a typical yard. Bare dirt under hard sun can become an oven by afternoon. Wind skims moisture away. A heavy rain slams exposed ground, seals the surface, and then the water runs off instead of sinking in. Then we look at the cracking bed, the struggling seedlings, the rising water bill, and assume we need more products. But a covered bed behaves differently, almost immediately. Slip your hand under mulch on a hot day, and the difference is obvious. It is cooler, damp, longer, softer. That one change alters the entire invitation being sent underground. Microbes don't burn out as quickly. Fungi can stretch. Worms can travel without crossing a dry, dangerous surface. The whole place stops acting like a parking lot and starts acting like habitat. This is where the leverage is, not in doing more work, but in creating conditions that let countless small workers begin doing theirs. If you lay down cardboard, overlap the seams, soak it, and cover it with leaves, straw, or chipped trimmings, you've already done something most gardeners underestimate. You've blocked harsh light, slowed evaporation, softened weed pressure, and started feeding the decomposers from the top down. If you dig a trench, drop in rotting branches, cover them back up, and plant above them, you're storing future moisture in wood that will slowly break down and hold water like a buried reservoir. If you save coffee grounds, vegetable peels, shredded paper, and autumn leaves, then heap them where you actually grow food, you aren't making a mess. You're building a pantry for the soil food web. And once that pantry exists, you don't have to rescue the bed weekly. That is the part many people miss. They want proof of life, but they keep destroying the conditions life needs to stay. They till deep because the ground looks compacted. They hoe aggressively because the top looks messy. They leave it bare because neatness feels responsible. Then they wonder why the bed keeps resetting back to stress. Meanwhile, the underground builders had already started laying out a different future. Worm channels begin to form. Air starts moving deeper. Water stops puddling on top and begins traveling down. Organic matter gets pulled below the surface, a little at a time. Aggregates start forming, those dark crumbs that hold both moisture and oxygen. This takes time, but it takes surprisingly little money. The expensive part was the old cycle of intervention. If you have a simple biological attractant to bring worms in, use it wisely. But understand what keeps them. There isn't the trick. It is the home, food, moisture, cover, and calm. That combination can multiply a small beginning into a self-renewing system. A few worms become many. A thin layer of mulch becomes richer humus. A bed needing constant watering starts staying moist a day longer, then two. The texture under your fingers changes. The smell changes too. It stops smelling flat and mineral and starts smelling like a forest floor after rain. That is when you know the engine has begun turning on its own. There is one caution here, and it matters. Once you start inviting life back in, observation becomes part of the job. Not every worm, like movement in the soil, is a blessing. Some species build structure slowly and feed the land. Others strip the surface too fast and leave instability behind. So when you lift mulch, pay attention to behavior, texture, and what is happening to your leaf layer over time. A healthy system leaves signs: steady decomposition, stable moisture, crumbly soil, roots moving more easily, fewer extremes after heat and rain. The goal isn't just to attract activity. The goal is to support the right kind of activity, the kind that makes the land more resilient with each season. And that is the deeper shift. You stop acting like a manager of inputs and start acting like a host. Instead of asking, what can I buy for this bed, you ask, what can I stop disturbing? What can I cover? What can I return? What can I stack here that nature already knows how to digest? That question alone can save people a surprising amount of money, labor, and disappointment. Because when the system is given shelter and steady organic matter, it begins performing work. No machine can imitate at the same price. Quietly, daily, without a fuel bill. If you have a patch of exhausted ground, try the laziest smart move first. Cover it, feed the surface, leave the soil profile mostly intact. Then watch what changes when you do less, not more. I'd be curious to know which simple material you have easiest access to right now. Cardboard, leaves, wood chips, kitchen scraps, or old branches, because that is probably where your soil recovery starts. Here is where this stops being a gardening hobby and becomes something much more serious. Because when systems get shaky, food is no longer just food. It becomes access. It becomes leverage. It becomes the difference between standing in a checkout line, staring at empty shelves, and walking a few steps outside, brushing back mulch, opening a cellar shelf, or pulling a basket in from the yard, and knowing dinner is already in your hands. That is what living soil really gives you. Not just a prettier bed, not just a better tomato. It gives you a measure of independence. That can't be printed, shipped, patented, or inflated away. A bag of fertilizer is gone the moment you spread it. A bottle of spray is empty the moment the problem returns. But knowledge of how to wake the soil, how to protect moisture, how to build decay into fertility, how to invite worms and microbes back into dead ground, that stays with you, and once it is in your hands, you're no longer entirely trapped inside somebody else's supply chain. Think about the contrast for a moment. One household is refreshing grocery apps, arguing over prices, buying vegetables that look perfect and taste like nothing, hoping the next delivery truck shows up on time. Another household steps into the cool morning air. Another household steps into the cool morning air, lifts a crate from the shade, rinses dirt from carrots at the sink, cuts greens that were rooted in real soil just minutes before, and cooks from a place of calm instead of panic. Same economy, same headlines, completely different relationship to fear. That difference doesn't begin at harvest. It begins much earlier, in quiet decisions that seem almost too small to matter. Leaving roots in the ground instead of tearing everything out, covering bare soil before the sun can bake it hard, saving kitchen scraps, leaves, and old stalks, because decay isn't waste, it is tomorrow's structure. Mixing a few humble ingredients, pouring them through mulch, and trusting that unseen workers below will answer if the conditions are right. These aren't glamorous acts, no one applauds them, but over time they build something people only notice when they don't have it. Resilience. And resilience isn't abstract. It looks like soil staying damp longer in a dry spell, so you aren't dragging hoses every evening. It looks like roots pushing deeper, because the ground is finally open enough to breathe. It looks like fewer yellowing leaves, fewer emergency purchases, fewer desperate attempts to rescue plants with stronger and stronger products. It looks like a pantry shelf with jars, a basket by the back door, a freezer with surplus put away, and a body that remembers what real nourishment feels like. This is why reclaiming fertility matters beyond one season. You aren't just feeding plants. You're rebuilding a local source of actual food in a time when more and more people have outsourced that responsibility completely. And when everything is normal, that may seem efficient. Until it isn't, until prices jump, until shelves thin out, until transport stalls, until the food available is technically edible, but stripped of freshness, flavor, and life. In those moments, the person who can step outside and gather something real isn't lucky. They're prepared in the oldest, most human sense of the word. So yes, start with the worms, start with the mulch, start with whatever patch of ground you have, even if it looks hopeless today. A backyard corner, a narrow side yard, a few containers, a neglected bed full of dust and disappointment. The scale matters less than the direction, because every handful of soil you bring back to life is one more piece of your life, removed from dependence on a brittle system that has trained people to buy fertility, buy protection, buy flavor, and buy back what healthy land once gave freely. And that is the deeper contract here. If you care for the soil as living ground, it pays you back in ways no receipt can measure. It steadies you, it teaches patience, it rewards attention. So if the next wave of panic buying ever comes, let other people fight over what is left under fluorescent lights. You want to be the one who walks outside, kneels down, and brings in what your land has been quietly preparing all along. That isn't a pastime. That isn't a trendy aesthetic. That is food sovereignty at the scale of a home, a garden, a family.